Well, good morning, friends, and welcome to Freedom Harvest Farms. My name, of course, is Aislinn Campbell, and back there behind the screen is my partner, Joe Hilliard.
Hello.
Happy Easter. What a beautiful day it is. The sun is out, the air is cool, the flowers are popping, all the birds are chirping, and it feels really good to be alive. And it feels really good to know that He is risen, right? I love that. It feels so good to know that. All right. Let's talk about what we can actually do in life to help regenerate the earth that we live on as the good stewards that we are of the land that we've been given by God, right? So the last few weeks, we've been talking about the 5 principles of regenerative agriculture. The first week, we talked about armoring your soil. We talked about making sure that your soil always had something covering it, like mulch and litter, like different types of plant growth, always leaving armor for your soil. The second week we talked about biodiversity or diversity. We talked about having a wide variety of different types of plants and of course the animals as well. And we're going to talk more about the animals next week, but this week I want us to talk about live plants and roots, continual live plants and roots. And there are 4 important things to keep as the key points of this particular principle. The first one is that we want to make sure that we, just like we talked about in week 1, again, that we armor the soil, right? If we keep the soil alive with plants in it, then we're going to help the soil be more successful. So keeping living plants, continual living plants in your soil is going to be really important for this continual live concept, this principle. So keeping the soil armored, right? We've already learned that, right? Now we're going to talk about the fact that we want to keep nutrients in the soil. Nutrients in the soil are going to be good for your next season's crop. Nutrients in the soil are going to be good for whatever you choose to do with your plants or your fields after that. Nutrients in the soil are going to be good for holding on to and retaining the food, the nutrients that the plants are going to need that you can use for the next season. So what plants will do is they'll draw up nitrogen, they'll draw up calcium, and they'll hold it in their roots, they'll hold it in their stems, they draw the energy out of the air with the photosynthesis that they do. They draw in energy from all kinds of places and they hold on to it. They hold it in the soil, that energy that we're often looking for, not just for our plants and animals, but also for ourselves, for our cars, all of that. Well, plants have the ability to retain that for us. So in the heat of the summer, they're retaining the cool temperatures. In the winter, they're retaining the warmth. And they're retaining all of those nutrients. So then as that stuff starts to decompose and break down, or as we cut it to feed our animals or to lay flat and armor the soil in other places, then we can use that to grow. It'll break down into the soil, and then we'll have it for the next season. The third thing that we have to do is we have to make sure that we keep food available for the soil, okay? So all the creatures that have food in the soil, and I'm going to point out a few more of these things for you in just a minute, but I want to go through these four things. The food that retains in the soil for the soil life. So all the micronutrients, all the microbiology that's underneath the soil, all the fungi, all of that stuff that's underneath the soil, that is the base of the entire food web. So the soil is a part of our food web that we participate in. So we have to keep food in there. So when we keep the root ball of a live plant in there, we retain the food that the plants need and that the soil needs to stay healthy. And then the last thing is that we retain the stability of the soil. So all kinds of things happen where just simply that a lot of roots are growing together and they're creating a web and they're holding the soil together. But in addition to that, they actually secrete polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are like glue in the soil, and that holds our soil together. If you've been to, my parents just got back from West Texas, up in the very top of the panhandle of Texas. up actually near where a section of the Dust Bowl happened. They were talking about 50-mile-an-hour winds, and it was the craziest sandblast they'd ever seen or been involved in. That's the kind of stuff that if you've got continual live plants and roots growing in the soil, then you don't have as much wind blowing away all of your soil, okay? So I want to show you around our farm. Of course, it's a beautiful day. There's lots of beautiful flowers, so just take a look at the beauty today. But I'm going to point out a few things. Of course, you can see that this particular garden I've left with continual plants. I've left plants in that I'm not even harvesting. I've got different types of Brussels sprouts and cabbage and broccoli, all the different flowers that have been left over here. And then I'm constantly just keeping this the soil with plants. Now, I want to be able to walk down the footpaths, so instead of leaving plant growth there, that's where I leave my composted material or litter or something else to armor that soil, even if I'm not growing on it. So this is one way to just leave it over the winter time, over the summertime, where you're just going to leave the plants over the soil, right? All of these different types of flowers I've talked about over the time periods over the last few months have this ability to actually retain those nutrients. So all the growth that's happening here, the soil plant that's still alive, is protecting the soil in that soil armor, but it is also retaining nutrients, pulling nutrients up and holding them in its plant stalk, in its leaves. It's holding on to the nutrients. So then, if we mow it down, the whatever nutrients were in that plant just lay on the soil, and then that energy in the soil is able to break down into the soil for the next season if we ever decide to grow back into it. That's why a lot of times I'll talk about doing the hugelkultur beds, because there's nutrients retained in that plant. When it breaks down into the soil, it comes down on the plants as well. So you can see that this garden is finally starting to really take off and grow really nicely. And you can see a lot of coverage is happening. This was bare. I don't like it being bare. I do have a lot of different types of weeds coming up. I don't want those to get out of control. So I'll just go through and do a little bit of picking and just kind of pick at it just a little bit, but not too heavily, because I want that soil to be covered as soon as it can be covered, right? But I'm just going to manage it slowly and take care of what I need to take care of before it becomes an issue. And that's what we're working on with managing any kind of coverage, any kind of live plants we can. These are my potatoes. This is the three sisters of corn, beans, and squash. I have cucumbers that are starting to grow up. I have pulling beans that are starting to grow up. Over there I have another nice vining squash that's coming up as well. Different types of beans and squash and cucumbers and peppers are what are growing in this garden over here. Okay, let's walk up to the front garden. Leaving patches of nice sunflowers when you go through, you can, that's good for your pollinators, of course, as well. But it's also really good to have that. The bigger a plant is, the more nutrients it retains. So if you can leave it, leave it. It creates the shade, which is the armor, and protects the soil. And then, of course, it also retains the soil, so when we do start to have the flooding rains, the heavy thunderstorms, things like that, we don't lose all of our soil as it washes away because of those saccharides, new fancy word I've learned to use better. Saccharides are that glue that holds the soil together, and the plants exudate it, another fancy new word I'm learning as I'm getting to understand the principles of regenerative agriculture better and how to communicate them to you. Exudate is like the plant excretes, just like an animal excretes, just like you excrete. Well, insects excrete, everything excretes. That's what plants do. And when plants do that, they actually feed the soil. And so that's the food for the soil. So you can see a really nice patch of plant and root going on here that's covering this soil. When this stuff starts to break down or get too weedy in the summertime, it doesn't look pretty anymore, we'll just mow all this heavy-duty stuff down and we'll just let it lay down. But during the whole season, it's pulling in more energy, and it's retaining that energy. And so what it's going to do is that next season, my flower garden will be even better, because it'll have even more composted energy down inside of it to create the next season. This this area was my sweet potato patch where the roots are what you're pulling out, right? So I pulled out the roots, but I don't want to leave it bare. So as soon as I could cover it with mulch, I covered it with mulch. And then now I'm going to go ahead and let the sunflowers grow up. You've been watching me transition this section. I started way down there and I transitioned row by row by row by row by row and just kept coming this way. And now you're seeing brand new, clean rows. Did somebody dig up a plant last night? It's funny, somebody dug right here. Now I don't know what they dug up because it doesn't look like they dug up a plant, but somebody dug right there last night. Probably a rabbit or something. Okay, but you can see what I'm talking about here with the fact that I have one row left. One row that hasn't been done left. That doesn't mean I just go, oh, I'm just going to go ahead and tear that up. I'm not going to tear it up until I plant it back, because as quickly as I tear something out, I let it grow back.
So real quick, this is a great example.
Yep.
This is your composting in place.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what that does. That helps me with the flooding that is likely going to be coming along. But yes, and you can see, let's see if we can find a nice big root.
Here you go.
For one thing, I leave the roots down inside too. So here's an example right here. Can you see this? There's actually a dead stem right here. And so now it's finally dead and it'll just start to break off, right? Mm-hmm. But it's still alive enough. There's still something holding it in the soil down there. So down around that root, and that's all the sunflowers and
here's another one.
The okra, all the different things that I grow in the summer, in the fall, and in the summertime. The roselle, you see. And so all it does, I just cut it off and then let that stay down inside of there, because I'm not disturbing the soil, which is one of the principles of agriculture. I'm also allowing that to be still a place where it will feed the soil. The soil is the base of the food web. The food web is extremely important because we're at the top of the food web. And we want to make sure the base of the food web is healthy in order for the top of the food web to be healthy.
I remember in your series at the very beginning, the series that you're currently doing, Soil Armor is not to disturb the soil. And very clearly, I mean, even someone less experienced than you, like myself, yanking that big root ball out of the soil is going to do nothing but clearly disturb it.
Exactly. And so I have to do a little bit of that in order to get these rows cleaned up to get the annual plants planted in them, the annual vegetables. But I don't just tear it up, I plant it back immediately. And so you can see, and in some places I don't even mess it up because I don't want to take things out. So you can see I still have sunflowers growing here because those sunflowers are going to be helpful in the summertime. They're going to be shade, and they're also going to be really good for the insects, the pollinators. They're going to draw in the pests like the aphids. Here's another thing though. I harvest the really prettiest flowers and sell flower bunches. And so during the spring I have nice flower bunches. Now you've seen me week to week. If you go back and look, you've seen me take over this garden. You've seen now I've got beautiful beans growing right there. Now these second row of beans is starting to come up really nice. So that row that's nice and tall and big back there, it's going to start producing beans in the next week or two, right? Up here in the front, I've got some amazing pepper plants that are kind of hiding out in here. So peppers on this row, eggplants on this row. The rows that you saw over there were beans and squash mostly, and some peppers as well. And I do it row by row. So you can see, look here, I'm going to surround everything. This goes back to last week's principle of diversity. I'm surrounding a pepper plant with sunflowers. It's got still onions in here. And then I've got the beans that are starting to come up. And what I have next to it, instead of just doing pepper after pepper after pepper, I actually have an eggplant to kind of break it up. So I'm creating diversity. That makes things a lot, go back to last week's episode. You can listen to a little bit more of why diversity is so important. Look at this pretty pepper. So proud of my peppers. Peppers make me happy.
Here's another one.
Oh yeah. Those are Anaheims, bell peppers. They're all sweet peppers. All different kinds of snacking peppers and stuff like that. So over here was the stuff that I planted at the right after the freeze. So that would have been back in December and January. So mostly this garden got planted in January. So if you look at it, it's like January, February, March, April. You can see how I've planted this garden in this way. So the stuff that's changed, the stuff that's up here is going to be different than the stuff that's back up here. I have a lot of dill, broccoli, onions, leeks, beets, carrots, lettuce. But then I also go back in and I plant in other things that can come up later on. So this is going to be some sort of a cantaloupe, right? So when I go through and weed this stuff out again to clean it up, after I've gotten all my beds planted, all my gardens have been planted, then I can go back in and do some replanting, clean the weeds out. But I never clean the weeds out without putting something else in, because I want continual live plant and root growing everywhere, all over the land and all over in the garden. So anywhere we take something out, we put something else back in. And letting your grass grow tall, like I always like it when we get into a little stage where the grass gets a little bit tall. It's not the most aesthetic. It's also a little bit fresh, you know, like it's harder to walk in. That's probably a better way to say it. But it means that we're creating a lot of energy in those plants. Plants are retaining a lot of, and then we're creating a lot more compost to break down, organic matter to break down and to create the nice stuff that feeds the soil, creates nutrients for the soil, armors the soil, and helps to create the stability in the soil. And those are the 4 key points that we want to pay attention to when we're talking about the importance of continual and live plants in our regenerative agricultural methods. Here's another example of letting things grow, right? This is not what was here last year. We do actually have a few things still that have done okay. So right here I have the Texas rose. I haven't had time to trim up these perennial plants yet because I've been planting my annual gardens.
These all got really heavily affected by that freeze.
Exactly, yep. And so this whole row got heavily affected by the freeze, which means that then when these sunflowers came out, we just let them grow, because all of this is creating a wind block, a barrier. Look at that pretty little butterfly. Oh, I chased it away. Sorry. Pretty sunflowers attract the pollinators, keep the soil healthy that's down underneath here, because eventually I want this whole row to be a beautiful row garden of Turk's cap. Here's some Turk's cap right here. Nice big plant. Some milkweed. Some Texas salvia. Eventually I want this to be a whole nice hedgerow of beautiful perennials that protects my chickens, gives them shade, gives my rabbits some shade, gives
wind
them
protection,
wind protection, because south wind comes from this side and gives them some protection from that. But in the meantime, these sunflowers have been beneficial, and I've got live plants and roots growing there. Okay, so we started cleaning up this section over here. And you'll see that, let's see, this is a good example. Right here on this row, last year, I had roselle growing over here. And the roselle is a big, nice plant that I harvest in the fall. Real pretty big red flowers on it. And nice leaves, a pretty plant in the Turk's cap, cotton, and that same mallow family. All grows in the same family. And I harvested the calyxes from it to make that really delicious red tea that a lot of people make and like to drink. Hibiscus tea, if you've ever drank that, that's what it is. Well, the plants grow really big, and they have a huge stalk on them. See here, and I've left it in there, right? So the plant has started to rot and let go of it. And so basically I'm just letting those plants compost down inside there.
When you want to get rid of it, you cut it off about 2-3 inches above the dirt.
Yeah, and it was dead. So that's just one of your winter cleanup things. You just, after the freeze comes through, because it's going to die, that plant's going to die every year during our freeze. If we have a decent freeze, it's going to die. And so then I'm just going to cut it off at the root and then just leave that in there. The whole time that's there, whether this is bare or not, and this actually has stayed bare because the chickens stick their head out and eat a lot of it. And so we added in another section up here in the front that I went ahead and replanted the roselle. See, here's a roselle right here. And then here's another one right here. And then I planted in these marigolds. And then I also went in and planted a bunch of watermelon seeds and basil seeds to try to get this to grow over. But right before we went to go back and recreate this bed, because this is kind of a new bed now. It had a bunch of big sunflowers on it. So we had to cut the sunflowers down in order for the plants underneath them to get enough sun at this time of the year. And then later on, all that stuff's going to grow up and carry over, and it'll grow over. Now it might go dead in the winter time, and I'll work to try to maybe put some stuff, just sprinkle down some stuff that'll grow in the winter time over the top of it, a cover crop, just to make sure. But eventually things start to take over, and then there's not a huge concern. The other thing that you can do, if you always just want to make sure the soil is armored, is if you're not going to let something grow over the top of it, because it just doesn't make sense to put something there for whatever reason, then you can go ahead and just cover it up with mulch. And that's the same kind of armor. It's not going to be in the continual live plant root section principle, but it'll be in the armor section principle, and that's just as important as one of the main armors. So just taking a look here at my garden, you can see the beautiful lettuce that's growing. The tomatoes are starting to set. Joe, how was your delicious red tomato, cherry tomato that you ate yesterday?
It was a little tart, but very delicious.
Well, then we need to let them go a little bit longer, get warmed up by a little bit more sun. But you can see the diversity, which is what we talked about last week, is a big part of what's going on in this garden. We're continuing to putting up the trellises. You can see here, I've got squash, I've got onions, tomatoes. There's still sunflowers growing. I've got beans, I've got squash, I've got lettuce. All kinds of stuff going on over here. These brand new little sections that I pulled out over here, I don't want to leave them bare. So I've got the radishes that are growing down underneath there. There's going to be some basil and some zinnias starting to pop up. I say this is probably, that might be a bit radish too, but this is probably like some kind of a zinnia or something like that. So more as these last rains that we just got the other day, you'll start to see more things popping up, and you'll see full coverage eventually in this garden, just like you've seen in the other gardens. And you can see that just after 1 year, now this garden was planted in March of last year, you can see that there's a much more full coverage from last year to see what's happened in this year.
That's interesting. We just walked through that brand new garden about 1 year ago.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, in the very first year in a garden, it's really hard to keep a garden really happy and healthy. The wind, it doesn't have the protection. It doesn't have this regenerative agriculture principles on it, because it's a brand new garden with new soil and all kinds of new stuff going on. So that's part of getting it to the place. It takes a little bit of investment, it takes some change in how you do things.
It's also interesting to have watched you add on to this garden.
Oh, yes.
The rows weren't quite as long, and then we added 2, 3, 4 more feet to a couple of them, installing these trellises.
Yes.
Not part of the original design, but it's fun to watch you evolve them.
That's kind of how I like to do it, especially in a backyard garden. In some other larger scale gardens, I don't do it exactly the same way, but in a backyard garden, I want to create a food forest. I want to really start to take over the land in my backyard and make it aesthetically pleasing and all of that. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time giving you some updates on the upcoming educational things that I have available to come out to. You know that every Monday I do open farm. And so every Monday the open farm is garden healing in the morning, from 9 to 11 kind of thing. And then we break for lunch. You can hang out with me. We have lunch together, BYO. I'll share some of my stuff. Then we also break for a Course in Miracles contemplative study group that I do online. You're more than welcome to be a part of that if you're interested in that. And then we'll have some afternoon garden healing. Now, as the summer heat starts to set in, we'll go ahead and take a siesta in the middle of the day, and then we'll have garden healing later in the afternoon. But it's still been pleasant in the midday, so we're still having that, around 2:30, from 2:30 to 5, that kind of thing. That's when garden healing is. That is free and open to the public. I'm here. You can see. You can be with me. We'll talk about not just gardening, but we'll talk about all kinds of things that are going on in life, right? I'm also on April the 29th, Saturday, 10 a.m., April the 29th, I am hosting an organic gardening class. That's a 1.5-hour class from 10 to 11:30 a.m. It costs $44 for a carload. So that means you can fill your car up with all your friends or all your family and come out to the farm for $44. If you gather up you and 3 friends, it's $11 a person. If you gather up you and and 6 friends, well, then it's hardly doesn't cost you anything except the drive and coming out here. So gather up some friends, come out April the 29th, and we'll get an in-person working with the garden, looking at things. I'll talk more about the principles of regenerative agriculture and be with you here to be able to answer those questions for you. I've also got 2 coaching sessions that I have really been pushing recently. Spring, of course, is a good time to do a hands-on gardening in your garden. I'll come to you. I will help you with your gardening. I'm doing that for 2 hours for $77. But then I'm also starting a new food coaching session as well. It's called Food is Medicine. And I want to teach you what I've learned about transitioning your diet. I do an autoimmune protocol diet, and we'll stick very closely with that even after I reach my 90 days and go back to re-entering some of the foods. But all I'll be re-entering is some of my delicious farm-grown foods and not a whole lot of any of that other stuff, because I've changed my life, I've changed the cravings, and I feel differently about things, and I would like to help you. I would like to teach you what I've learned. I would like to show you the best brands, the stores, everything that you can do to make it, and to get some of that information in a way that can really help you out. I'm also doing that $77 for 2 hours. We can meet at the grocery store, we can meet at your home, we can meet at a coffee shop. You can come here to the farm and join me for that. That's Food is Medicine coaching. And of course, don't forget that we also are doing our podcast. It launches every Monday morning. It's called Dinner Table Talks. It goes out to every podcast platform, Spotify, Apple TV, Google Play, any of those that you use. But we also post it usually a day or two later in the week on YouTube. If you haven't gone over to my YouTube channel, or if you're here on my YouTube channel right now, please subscribe to my channel and tell me what you think about this podcast. Thank you all so much for being here. Happy Sunday. I love you all very much. And don't forget that we together in this life that we are living can live in the way that God and Christ wants us to live, and that we can be a part of sharing the beautiful, loving, regenerative nature of life and rebirth that exists here on the planet for us. I love you all. Happy Sunday. See you soon.